I'd like you to meet Marshall Hale. In 1984, Mr. Hale, then 24 years old, was arrested, charged, and convicted for the rape of a teenage girl in Philadelphia. 33 years later, in 2017, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office removed all charges from Mr. Hale and moved for his immediate release on the basis of a blood test that showed conclusively that Mr. Hale was not, in fact, the rapist. The blood test that secured Mr. Hale's release was actually conducted by the Philadelphia Police Crime Lab on the same day as the final day of Mr. Hale's trial was unfolding in 1984, but neither prosecutors nor defense attorneys knew of its existence. It wasn't delivered to Mr. Hale for 10 years, and by the time he received it, he wasn't represented by counsel, and he lacked the scientific expertise necessary to understand what the test said or what its value was to his case. It wasn't until 2009, when the newly formed Pennsylvania Innocence Project took on Mr. Hale's case, that a scientific expert reviewed the file, and even then it took 8 more years to secure his release through appellate litigation. DNA testing that has helped so many others who were wrongfully convicted secure their freedom didn't exist during Mr. Hale's original trial in 1984, and it couldn't be used in his case because all of the physical evidence submitted to the courts had been lost. And so as a result, Marshall Hale spent 33 years of his life incarcerated in a Pennsylvania prison due to a series of miscommunications and blunders when the key to his salvation was with us the entire time. Cases like Mr. Hale's are unfortunately far too common in our criminal justice system. The National Registry of Exonerations has cataloged more than 3,600 instances where innocent people have been convicted and incarcerated for crimes they didn't commit, serving a total of over 33,000 life years in prison. My colleagues and I study these cases so that we can learn how to prevent them in the future. We've interviewed hundreds of prosecutors, judges, defense attorneys, police officers who were involved in these cases, and the unifying theme from all of them is, none of us wanted to be part of these cases. None of us wanted them to happen. And the question we ask is, if nobody wanted these crimes to these injustices to happen, why did they happen anyway? The criminal justice system is a complex, dynamic, stressful series of human interactions where people are making decisions with imperfect information, where people's lives are at stake. And like any human-designed and human-administered system, we make mistakes all the time. To err is human. But we've designed checks and balances in that system that are designed to catch our errors before they become catastrophic and help us in our search for truth. And so normally if we make a mistake, we catch it somewhere along the line in the investigation phase or the trial phase, or if necessary, the appellate phase. But occasionally, an error will slip through our checks and balances and go undetected far too long, as it did in Mr. Hale's case. And unfortunately, it's likely that there are some errors that we simply never catch. My colleagues and I thought, what if we looked at other complex, high-stress series of human interactions and look at those systems and see how they reduce their errors? Are there things we can learn there that we can apply to criminal justice? So first we went to transportation. Now, we know that car accidents happen and that sometimes they result in death, but we get in cars all the time without even thinking about it. In fact, I bet some of you came here today by picking out your phone, calling a total stranger in a car you've never seen, and just trusting them to get you here safely. And we do that because our system of car travel is pretty safe. We've worked hard and long over a long period of time to increase its safety. In fact, for every 300,000 car trips, do you know how many people are injured? About 3. So only 1 in 100,000 car trips results in an injury, as a result of which we all feel really comfortable using Uber or Lyft until we're actually in the car and meet our driver. Then we went and looked at another complex, dynamic series of human interactions where people's lives are at stake. This one's a little bit more serious. Medicine. Now, in medicine, they call never events something that, as the name implies, should never happen when you're caring for a patient. You operate on the right arm when the left arm is where the injury is, or you leave a surgical implement in the patient's body cavity. These are things that should never happen, and medicine has worked hard to elevate its system of safety and quality to prevent these never events. And so for every 300,000 surgeries, we see only about 25 never events. So more dangerous than getting behind the wheel of a car, but still pretty safe. So then we asked ourselves, well, how does criminal justice compare? For every 300,000 criminal cases, how often do we get it right or wrong on guilt or innocence? It's actually impossible for us to know how many people are currently sitting in prisons across the United States who are innocent of the crimes for which they've been convicted. But we do have a data set that can allow us to do some preliminary estimates. That data set is the data set of people who have been convicted of murder and sentenced to death and have later been exonerated. And yes, that data set is large enough to be a statistically significant sampling. When we statistically analyze that data, it suggests that we make errors in capital punishment cases 4% of the time. 1 in every 25 capital punishment cases, we get it wrong on guilt or innocence. Just as an aside, there's about 2,250 people in death rows across the United States right now, and a 4% error rate means that 90 of them are likely innocent, only we don't know which 90 they are. Now, you could probably say that death penalty cases are the most likely to be appealed and the most likely to be reviewed in detail, and therefore you would think that our error rate in other criminal cases is probably higher than 4%. But for purposes of this conversation, let's be conservative. Let's cut that error rate in half, and let's say we have a 2% error rate in criminal justice when it comes to guilt or innocence. If so, that would mean that we make 7,500 mistakes in every 300,000 trials. So the question that I think is obvious is, why is criminal justice so much worse than these other complex, dynamic systems of human interaction where people's lives are at stake? And is there something we can learn from transportation and medicine that would help us? So we went and interviewed hospital administrators and the National Transportation Safety Board, and we said, what do you guys do to reduce your errors? Are you doing things that we're not doing in criminal justice? And the answer was, yes, we are. When there is a never event, when there's a wrong side surgery or a plane crash or the fire that occurred at Heathrow Airport and shut it down for a full day last week, the quality and safety engineers in these industries gather people together for what they call a sentinel event review, a blame-free root cause analysis that seeks to understand why this event, this unintended outcome, has evaded our existing system of safety and checks and balances and led to a tragic outcome that we can't allow to continue or be repeated. And the key to this, that's different than what we do in criminal justice, is the element of it being blame-free. Now, what I mean by blame-free is not that the pilots don't have to have their certifications or that the doctors and nurses don't have to have their training. But this is not an endeavor to find blame and remove these people from what they do. We're not out there looking to figure out who gets fired or who gets punished. We're trying to figure out, presuming talent and training and good faith, how good people who all wanted the same outcome nonetheless participated in an undesired and unacceptable outcome. And when we presume talent and training as the starting point, we ask different questions and we get different solutions. Now, to explain a little bit more what I mean, I'd like to talk about the world champion Philadelphia Eagles and their transcendent quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Now, I'm told that there are people who aren't Eagles fans out there. I'm not sure why that would be the case. And I think there are people who might not think Jalen Hurts is all that great a quarterback. But again, no matter what you think about Jalen Hurts, you got to admit that he's one of the 30 best people in the world at what he does. And the Eagles all are incredibly talented. They're also incredibly well trained, and they've practiced, and they're ready to go. They operate in a dynamic, high-stress, complex environment where things can happen at any time, but they've got a play that they've designed to run, and they're going to score a touchdown with it, and it's got contingencies, and they're ready for those, and they're ready to go. And then the ball gets hiked. And everything goes crazy. 22 guys are running around doing things that are unexpected. Maybe somebody falls down at a bad moment. The crowd is cheering. The weather conditions might be getting in the way. And Jalen Hurts is running around processing all this information in real time. And in one split second, he decides that throw is his best thing to do right there. That's what's going to help him and his team. And a lot of the time, he's right about that. A lot of the time, that pass is caught, and we move forward. But this time, tragedy. An unacceptable outcome, a sentinel event, an interception. Now, my buddies and I, we're up on the third deck, and we know exactly what the problem is. The problem is we've got a bad quarterback. We got to get a new quarterback. That guy's a bum. But that's not what the team knows. The team knows that there's a lot of things that go into that play. The team knows how complex what they're doing, and that lots of things are happening as that play is evolving. And they know that Jalen Hurts wanted that best outcome as much as anybody. So first they pat Jalen Hurts on the back, and then they get together as a team with their coach, and they break that play down frame by frame in a video review. And the simple question they ask is, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Why did this player move over here, and what impact did that have on Jalen's decision to make that throw? And they do this not to punish or blame anybody on the team, but so that as a team, they can redesign the play and take their talented, hardworking, caring people and put them in a better position to be successful next time. We don't do that in criminal justice. But when we do this in these other industries, in transportation, in medicine, in professional football, scientists who've reviewed these inevitably find there's no one thing that causes these sentinel events. It's always a confluence of contributing factors. And to explain how that works, they've defined this model called the Swiss cheese model. So let's take Marshall Hale's wrongful conviction. And let's assume that from the commission of the crime to the exoneration 33 years later, that's our block of Swiss cheese. And every human decision made in those intervening years, that's a slice of Swiss cheese, and the holes in each slice of Swiss cheese, those are the opportunities for error. Now, usually, if we make an inaccurate arrest, that gets caught. It gets caught by our existing checks and balances, by a prosecutor screening the case, by a defense attorney with an alibi, by a judge or a jury evaluating the facts. But occasionally, as in Mr. Hale's case, all of the holes in our Swiss cheese line up and the error sails right on through without being detected. And that's when you get your wrong side surgery, your plane crash, your wrongful conviction. Now, this is bad news from the perspective of the system right now because we've exposed flaws throughout our system. We've got the bad event, and then we've got the failures of our checks and balances. But what an amazing learning opportunity this is if we can really look at it objectively, because the opportunity is to close the holes in each part of our system, in each slice of Swiss cheese, any of which, if they had been in place before, would have prevented our bad outcome. So my colleagues and I were pretty excited by this idea, and we decided to test it on Mr. Hale's case. We gathered all the agencies that had participated in his case from start to finish, and we sat down and did a blame-free sentinel event review. When we looked at it, we realized that there had been no misconduct. There had been no intentional manipulation of anything in Mr. Hale's case. Yes, the police had taken an ID, but that ID was a sincere, just mistaken identification from the victim. And they had protocols for evaluating that ID that were outdated and would have been different in the future. The crime lab had clearly challenges with how they communicated with both prosecutors and defense attorneys. There was supervisory issues that never went back and checked about whether that report was going out. The crime lab is dedicated to rewriting these reports now so that somebody without a scientific background can understand them. And the courts, which had no particular expertise in handling physical evidence, took the information from his case, put it in a box, and put it in a storeroom in City Hall, which flooded. And so they moved it to another office in City Hall, which flooded. And now we don't know where it is. So we could improve the physical evidence handling protocols as a way to prevent things. Our team discovered 46 different contributing factors and situations, any one of which, had we interfered with them, would have prevented Mr. Hale's wrongful conviction or would have greatly accelerated our ability to set him free. And those 46 contributing factors led our group to 29 different recommendations for change that could close holes in our Swiss cheese throughout our system. We were so excited by this, and the participants in our criminal justice agencies were so excited by this, that we took our show on the road and we looked at other never events in criminal justice like the ones you see here. And in every instance, we've seen the same results. Dozens of contributing factors, dozens of recommendations for change. And again, this isn't about bad people. This is about putting good people in better situations to succeed. Now, you might say, okay, John, but aren't there people in criminal justice who do things? We hear about police and prosecutorial misconduct every day. And I guess I would say yes, there are people sometimes who act intentionally in ways that we wish they wouldn't. Our research suggests that happens far less than you might assume. But if that does happen, if we do find intentional misconduct, the Swiss cheese model still works. What we do is we say, why did that person think that acting intentionally would work, and why didn't we detect it? And we move upstream and look at the holes in our Swiss cheese that we can close that will elevate detection and deterrence of intentional misconduct. And so we're still improving the system, even though this is a blame-free event review, and that includes intentional misconduct. Now, we've been able to do these event reviews sporadically in different jurisdictions around the country, one at a time. But when you incorporate this into the culture of your quality change and safety in a system over time, the results are dramatic. The graph you're looking at here The red line represents fatal aviation crashes per million flights, and you can see that in the 50 years since aviation has been using Sentinel event reviews, we are dramatically reducing the number of fatal plane crashes that we see because we're learning from all of our safety events and closing holes in our Swiss cheese over time. Not coincidentally, what we also see is the blue line increasing, which is the number of flights people take, which has gone up fourfold in the same period of time. Why have the flights gone up? Because we know it's safe. Why do we know it's safe? Because they've been doing event reviews. Let's contrast that with a never event in criminal justice, officer-involved shootings in the United States over time. The Washington Post has been keeping these statistics for the last 10 years. This is not an area that we haven't focused on in our communities. What our process has been in criminal justice is not to learn from blame-free event reviews, but instead to simply remove the officers from the equation, which doesn't help good officers when they're confronted with difficult situations act better. We can't change the human condition. We have to change the conditions in which our humans operate. I want to leave you with one final thought. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered by officers from the Minneapolis police. Now, we've done accountability reviews, we've done criminal trials. Those officers did a lot of things that they shouldn't have done, and they've received sanctions and punishments for that. But ask yourself, have we done enough by punishing those officers to prevent the next death in police custody, to prevent the next George Floyd, and to protect the next officers who are out there trying to keep us safe from being in situations where they feel the need to use deadly force? And ask yourself, if we had implemented Sentinel event reviews 50 years ago like aviation has, or 30 years ago like medicine has, could we have prevented Mr. Floyd's death by already closing those holes in our Swiss cheese so that everybody involved acted differently? And if so, could we have prevented the protests and the outrage and the anguish felt by millions of Americans at a criminal justice system that allowed the same Sentinel event to happen over and over and over again? What happened to Mr. Floyd was a tragedy. What happened to Mr. Hale was a tragedy. A tragedy made up of dozens of mini errors that came together in just the wrong way to cause him to spend 33 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. I believe that Sentinel event reviews can prevent never events in criminal justice like wrongful convictions, officer-involved shootings, and deaths in custody. And as our founder, Benjamin Franklin, said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Thank you.